If I say anything that is not in alignment with your current beliefs, if it challenges you, presses your hot buttons, let's discuss that. Believe me, from my maybe limited experience, I know that's where the juice comes from in these courses. That's the good stuff, okay? So your participation, even conflict of interest, is welcome. Let's have a debate. Let's discuss things. I promise that I'm not that stuck in my view, even if it is the general consensus of the NLP world, that we couldn't change the rules around here. Because that's what rules are for. Okay, so I definitely do welcome your feedback, and if something sort of rubs you up the wrong way, if it's not in full alignment with your view, I'd love to hear your view. Especially today, we'll be discussing the presuppositions of NLP. There are fundamental pillars that we hold to be true. We believe these things to be true as effective NLP practitioners. And in so doing, when we're in peripheral vision, holding the space, and clients can feel that we're holding them in this comfortable space, okay, where they trust us. The reason why the NLP techniques work is because we hold these presuppositions to be true. And they ooze out of us in our communication style and in the rapport. And they motivate what's the next best type of question to ask? What's the next best skill to do or technique, okay? It's motivated by these. Presupposition number 1, the map is not the territory. Well, we explained that in depth yesterday when we spoke about the communication model. The territory is the external event. Your map is the internal representation. Of course, the map can never be the territory. How can your internal representation ever describe the pure sensory input that you're experiencing? It can't be, because your internal representation is always manipulated through the neurological filters, and we've all got neurological filters. You're born with some already, but they get ingrained pretty hard and fast for the first 6 years of your life. By age 6, they're pretty much there. Our maps of reality can never be the reality. They can be great maps, but they're still not 100% accurate. But certainly great maps, in other words, the positive, charismatic, optimistic type, is a more pleasant map to have than the miserable, pessimistic, sad type of map. I'm not saying positive is better than negative. I'm just saying they're different types and you might prefer one to the other, but it's still just a map. All right? The question is, are you able to relate to other people's maps of the world? Because when you are, you're able to step into their model of the world. And only when you can step into the model of the world of another can you relate to that person in a meaningful way so that you're able to lead them toward a better map. And what's a better map? It's the one that they'd like to have, that they're asking you to help them to achieve. It's not your map, it's the one that they want. We never assume, oh, my map of reality is much better than yours, let me superimpose it onto you. No. Are we all good on that one? The map is not the territory. The meaning of your communication is the response you get. The meaning others make of your communication will be the response you get from them. And if you're not getting the response that you want, then learn to change the way you're communicating until it gets the response you want. The thing is that most people don't do that. They just say it louder or faster, hoping that the other person will get it. The trick is to understand what modalities and submodalities are they using to create their maps. Utilize those things in your communication and you'll get better responses, or more appropriate responses. I can point my fingers, but it's not going to get you to do it. Or I can listen for how do you define your model of the world? Do you define your model of the world in pictures, in sounds, or feelings more? Do you talk about the way things look and see and the visions you have and how things are clear to you. In other words, you're using visual terms to define your experience. I need to listen out for that stuff. Because when I can identify you using more visual terms, I know I need to speak back to you in those terms, or we will have a mismatch, and there will be no rapport. You won't understand, and I won't be influential. So I need to use your terminology. If you use words that are more auditory, like how things sound, how things ring a bell, how things sound true to you, and you're using words that are associated more with an auditory model of the world, I need to be flexible in my communication so I can use those types of terms and thereby develop rapport and thereby have you understand what I'm trying to have you understand. If you use more kinesthetic terms about how things make you feel and how you get to grips or not with certain things, how you are struggling to get a handle on something, I need to use these tactile, kinesthetic terms and phrases in order to reach you in your model of the world. Because I know unless I can be in your model of the world, I have very little use to you in terms of leading you forwards to a better model of the world. Okay? So we learn to listen actively in NLP to identify what words do the clients use to define their experience. I always repeat back the same words and categories of words, because it lights up the same neural net where the problem is that they're presenting. If I don't repeat back the same words, if I interpret it and give my own words that are similar, they mean the same thing to me. They don't mean the same thing to the client, though. And you're not lighting up the same neural net as the problem. And if you don't light up the same neural net as the problem, and now you begin your therapeutic intervention, it's likely not to connect where it needs to connect in order for them to experience the degree of change that they could were you using their precise words. People have all the resources they need to achieve their desired outcomes. If you want to be a good coach, you better believe that. They do. Your job is to help them tap into those resources. But if, for example, somebody comes in and they strike a chord and you go, that person is such a blah, 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 blah. You're putting them in a box and you will not be able to help them get out of that box, because while you think they have that label, you are down in that box with them. Okay? Had a discussion with 2 people in our group that teach children, and our discussions went along the lines of there are teachers and systems who are quick to diagnose children with certain labels. And as soon as those children are placed in those boxes, or adolescents for that matter, the system only teaches to that box and is not very good at helping them transcend that identification, to help them go beyond. But as soon as we can identify where the person is at, climb into their model of the world, and then lead them toward a more positive outcome, will we be really useful to that person? We all have the resources. All our resources are unique. We each have talents. Can we as teachers or coaches or therapists or communicators do a better job at helping people find their own internal resources? Well, if we believe, no matter what they think they are more than that, then we'll be able to do that. But if we're quick to judge and label them, we limit them and we limit ourselves. It's all there at the unconscious level, and the hypnotic trance is that wonderful state that it enables us to go inside and find our own best answers. Every behavior is motivated by a positive, or easier to chew on, purposeful intention. We're going to have to understand this one and appreciate it and believe it to be true if you want to be good at the parts integration, which I'm going to teach you tomorrow. I'm boldly declaring that every behavior that anyone has ever said or done or been responsible for has behind it a positive intention. Even the worst of them. I'm sure you can come up with examples where you know someone who experienced something terribly awful, And there could have been no positive intention behind the perpetrator's behavior. Okay? But in NLP, we know that if we look deep enough, we can find that the person responsible is aiming to at least feel good about themselves. Maybe the intention at first glance is to have more control. And if we chunk up on the intention behind control, we might find that the person is seeking to have more power. And if we chunk up on the intention behind power, we may find that they are seeking to find more satisfaction. And if we chunk up on that, we may find that they seek to feel happy. And maybe we can chunk up even higher to find that the highest intention behind the perpetrator's behavior was for them to feel love. And when we as practitioners know that the highest intention means no harm, but that person, with their level of awareness at the time, didn't know how else to do what they did, then suddenly we realize that their behavior was the best one they were capable of, given their level of resources at the time. That then loosens our thinking and helps us to perhaps become more accepting of that person's behavior, and helps your clients to maybe even become forgiving, and so they can move on in life. I'll share with you a quick little example. I had a 9-year-old client come to see me once with her mum. She had been subject to a smash and grab. Man came up to the window with stone in hand. Little girl was in the front passenger seat. Broken glass came flying all over her, and this hand reached over, grabbed Mom's handbag from the center console, pulled it out over the little girl, and ran away. From that day on, the girl would never climb in the car ever again, and was not sleeping at night. Terrible nightmares. Conventional psychotherapy was not helping, so as a matter of emergency, Mom brought the little girl to see me. First of all, I elicited that they were quite strong Christian. I have a Christian background, so I understand those wonderful metaphors, and I was able to step into her model of the world. And in so doing, I helped her to identify that the man's intention was so that he could survive, so that he could get what he thought he needed to have to be okay, to be happy. We chunked up to him just wanting to be happy. But he never had the education, the background, or the awareness to do anything else. He knew that in order to survive, he has to steal the money. Okay? That's all he knew to do at the time in his desperate situation. Had we have been raised in the circumstances that that guy got raised in, we might have done the same thing. And when my 9-year-old client realized this, she was able to let go. And that formed a major part of our intervention. The rest was easy. Okay? Now we just healed the inner child down there in that situation. I use a process of dissociation called authentic self-empowerment, where one's looking down, and because she's a Christian, I got her up into heaven. And she was with her angels, safe in heaven, looking down on herself over there, having the experience. And she saw that guy run back to the township. Of course, she's making this up in her mind, but it's healing. And she saw that as he went back to the township, he had money, he could buy food, and suddenly she could forgive him. She actually saw that he liked dancing, and she was a little dancer too. Oh, they've got something in common. We chunked up on the highest intention, and in so doing, she was able to release the emotion associated with that traumatic memory. If you cannot believe that every behavior has a positive highest intention, you wouldn't be able to facilitate a process like that effectively, because you yourself as the therapist will become stuck. And we in NLP believe that unless you can find the highest intention behind any behavior that somebody is a victim of, you are limiting yourself in the scope that you can help that person. It doesn't make the perpetrator's behavior acceptable. It just helps us to loosen our thinking about it when we realize it does somewhere behind there. have a purposeful intention at least. You are 100% responsible for your results. Yeah. Otherwise, who else is? Yeah. If you're putting the source of your happiness outside yourself, then anybody can take it away any time, and they probably will, if you're giving it to them. If what you're doing isn't working, do it differently. One definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over, hoping to get a different result.
But maybe it's just because the others don't understand what I mean.
Exactly. They don't understand what you mean, but can you get them to understand it through expressing what you mean differently until they understand it?
Yes.
Change your communication style until they get it. And there are an infinite different ways of changing the way you can say the same thing. There is no failure, there is only feedback. How to do it differently next time. This time, what I did didn't work. Great, now I know how not to do it. Edison, when asked, Dr. Edison, by a probing reporter, you said you're going to invent this elusive thing called light. But there are reports of 200 failed experiments. 200 times you have failed to create this thing called light. What do you have to say for yourself, Dr. Edison? He said, young man, I have not failed to create light. I've learned 200 ways not to create light. And then he did create light. I like to share this one with kids. I make a whole big point out of it in our Sam's World recording, which is helping children to build a healthy self-esteem. You can't get it wrong. You cannot fail. You can only learn how to do it differently. And every experience is a learning one. The most flexible person in a group has the greatest control. It's called the law of requisite variety in NLP. The most flexible catalyst in a system will control the system. When you're flexible in your communication style, you can have the most influence over people. But when you're stuck in your communication style, you're stuck in your model of the world, and in your model of the world, you're not really having much of an influence on other models of the world. If you're the most flexible communicator, you'll be able to get your point across such that it strikes the right chord. If you're inflexible in your communication, well, you'll have limited results. And of course, I think you folks wouldn't be here if you didn't already acknowledge the last one, to respect each person's model of the world. If you cannot respect another person's model of the world, don't even try. Persuade them, communicate to them, or convince them of anything. My teenage client who came to me and said, can you help me be courageous enough to go to the military? And I said to him, well, I've done the army, and in this day and age in South Africa, you're telling me to help you to be courageous enough to go to the army, especially given the motivation that you have to go and get a gun and do damage. I'm not congruent with that. That's not a model of the world I want to be in, so no. But can we help you to work towards the value that you want to manifest in your life, which, when elicited from him, was just to be happy and successful. And he thought he needed to do that to achieve happiness and success. So we helped him to find other ways to achieve happiness and success. But if you can't be in somebody's model of the world, you're not very useful to the person, especially youngsters. If we can't be a youngster ourselves, if we've forgotten what it feels like to be a child and we can't step into the model of the world, how can we ever have a positive and sustainable influence over them?